Welcome to the Safe Harbor Shining the Light podcast, where we will shine the light on community issues such as substance use disorder, poverty, homelessness, and the stigma that prevents many from getting the help that they need. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey guys, thank you for joining us today. I am really excited about this episode. You know, Safe Harbor is celebrating 20 years of ministry this year. And what better way to celebrate that than to have Debbie Haynes, the founder of Safe Harbor, joining Sarah and I. As you remember, Sarah is our director of development and we are co-hosts of the Shining the Light podcast. So thank you for joining us. And Debbie, thank you so much for being here. This was just a real special time for me. We're going to get to do a little bit of reminiscing. And, you know, you started Safe Harbor 20 years ago, and along the way, you picked me up, and then we picked Sarah up. And here we are just celebrating what God has done. Sarah, you know, you and I it's been very important to us to have these conversations about reducing the stigma of addiction and substance use disorder. And so we want to kind of bring Debbie into that conversation. And Debbie, I was thinking on the way over, when we tell the story, for years, I told the whole story. You know, every little monument I would share, but there's been so many highlights since I've been in this role, even from the beginning of Safe Harbor. So we won't do every highlight today, but I'd love to know. We know you were doing jail ministry, and we've all told the story about the woman that just kept coming back. But what was going through your mind, and what were you seeing? How was God working in your heart then?
Wow, Vicki, it seems like so long ago, and yet, again, it feels like it was just yesterday. I do remember just having such a naive approach to the jail and the women that were in there, really thinking the problems would be much more easily solved. But once I started going in there and hearing the stories of just how overwhelming their situations were, it was really very troubling to me, because I thought they don't just need one thing, they need a host of services available. And really looking around and doing the research, as some of you have heard this story, that I ended up calling 65 different organizations and individuals in the Hickory area, the Catawba County region, just to find out what resources were available and what was lacking. And so some really good resources are available, but such a big gap between those services, and big gaps that women could certainly fall through the cracks on. So that was what was going through my head, and really often going to sleep at night, or trying to go to sleep at night, thinking about those conversations, and really praying that God would bring someone along to make that difference, to provide the things that were needed for these ladies.
And lo and behold, that person was Debbie Haynes. You know, we're talking about substance use disorder a lot, but I wonder, what was it like as far as women experiencing homelessness then? And we're so grateful for our partners at the Salvation Army for providing night shelter. But was there anywhere for women to go during the day that were experiencing homelessness then?
No, there really wasn't. You know, they just wandered the streets, and that was a lot of what women would say to me at the jail when I would suggest you could go to the Salvation Army. They would say, but I would have to be on the street during the day, and that would be very detrimental to my recovery. So, you know, it was like they're right. There's really no place for them to go during daytime hours.
Yeah, and so that was you first visited the women at the Salvation Army and discipled them, and then you were, I guess, the church. What was the name of the church that allowed you to use their parsonage?
St. Paul's Lutheran Church at that time.
Right, and so there you were able to open the day shelter, and then that's when I started my journey with Safe Harbor in 2008, volunteering there.
Yes,
and
I remember.
I was changed forever. I never, ever took my pillow for granted or my home for granted after spending time with those precious ladies that had no place to lay their head. And then as we talk about, we kind of consider Sarah now our substance use disorder expert. She spent so many years in that field. So can both of you just elaborate, how is it different today than it was then? You saw a great need. Is the need greater today than it was then?
Oh, I feel that the need is much greater today. Like you, Debbie, I was very naive when I started working in substance use. I think the old school of thought, you deal with the substance use and everything else should fall into place. You just got to stop using. But when I started working alongside and I found out about Safe Harbor, my journey started in 2007 in the substance use field, and I ended up crossing paths with Debbie at the day shelter in 2008. And so when I started working with individuals struggling with substance use, because I worked for a substance use specific treatment provider at the time, on their case plans, there was a housing goal, an employment goal, a mental health goal, a relationship goal. And that really opened my eyes to, like, I'm not just dealing, like, with the substance use issue. Like, they don't have anywhere to live. You know, their relationships are broken. They haven't talked to their family in years. They could not name, there's a portion of the treatment plan where you have to help, they have to identify their support system. They couldn't even name one person. And so Safe Harbor was an answer to prayer in so many ways for me as a professional, because I could get to the women. Because when people are displaced and they are experiencing homelessness, you can't find them. Like, they're on your caseload and you're supposed to be working alongside of them and helping them, but you can't find them. And so it was great to be able to collaborate with Safe Harbor. But yeah, it was very eye-opening to see the hoops that as a provider you have to jump through to effectively assist individuals. But just think about the hoops that they have. You know, it's just such a daunting thing when they're in survival mode. They don't know where they're going to sleep. But yeah, here comes this real bubbly, blonde professional saying, oh, okay, well, here's your lovely treatment plan. We're going to meet all of these goals. And it was super challenging and it was heartbreaking. And so you see, wow, you begin to see the significance of community and how the community is going to have to come together to come alongside of this individual, because one provider and one little social worker isn't
At what age were you then,
I
Sarah?
was 21
my
years
gosh.
old. Yeah. So I've been changed just like you, Vicki, and the needs now. I mean, when you think about mental health, when you think about just, you know, the content that we, you know, from social media, from images, all these things that we're processing, you know, just, you know, the cost of living, all of these things, relationships are in such disarray. All of those things contribute greatly to our mental health. I participated in a mental health awareness event a couple of weekends ago, and last year there were 50,000 Americans that took their own life.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah,
Tragic.
no hope. They think they don't have any
No
hope.
hope.
Yeah.
So being a part, with my touches ongoing touches that I had with women that were getting services with Safe Harbor, I could see the hope restored in their face and in their eyes. And so it's like, okay, what's happening there that I could join in on and be a part of? Because well-intended systems and a lot of well-intended efforts, just like me carrying my little treatment plan around, trying to help these folks work towards meeting their goals, that you can do it, was not what was needed. It was that wraparound, holistic, collaborative community of support that's needed.
That will lead me into what I was wondering with you, Debbie. So you had to, you saw a need for women that, you first did the day shelter for women experiencing homelessness, and you recognized that substance use disorder was a big part of that. How in the world did you come up with a curriculum, and how did you know what they needed as far as their recovery? We know they need Christ, and they needed to know who they were in Christ and their worth was in Christ. But the recovery, Safe Harbor does such a great job with evidence-based recovery tools. How did you come to that?
Vicki, that was definitely a God thing, because we had become familiar with what at that point was called the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. And they had been doing this kind of work for decades, many of them had. And so I heard of a program out in Portland, Oregon called the Shepherd's Gate that they had an excellent program for women in substance use disorder. And so we contacted them, and they allowed me to come out and spend a week with them. They shared their curriculum with us. They shared, the components of their programming with us. And as I saw the results that were coming out of it, it's like, this is exactly what's needed in Hickory, North Carolina. So that's how we learned about the Genesis process. That's how we learned about books like Love is a Choice and Boundaries, and some of the sex education types of curriculum that we use. So, it was great to have a sister organization that had been doing this kind of work for a long time and had already ironed out a lot of the kinks, that was so generous to offer their support toward us when it comes to curriculum.
I love that. We are at Safe Harbor, one of our core values is collaboration, and we do seek out others that have been very successful. And now other agencies come to us, and man, we want to share because we're here because someone shared with us. Debbie, what were some things you learned as you were getting this? Would you do anything differently? And I'm sorry, I'm keep stacking questions. What are some things you've learned in getting an organization started?
Well, when people ask me that question, sometimes people come to me that are thinking of starting an organization or a ministry of some sort, and the first thing I do, of course, is bathe it in prayer, because was so key to our foundation. But the other thing is find out what's going on in the community and get involved in it. Because I started going to all these different community meetings. I knew nothing really. I was just like Alice in Wonderland at these meetings, but I really needed to know, okay, this is what this group is doing, this is what this group is doing, and get your name out there so people begin to think, okay, this is what they're trying to do, so we could build that collaboration. So I would always say those are the two most important things, getting to know what's going on in the community. As far as things that I would do differently, that's a hard question, because it was just, God just ordained every step right from the beginning. obviously it would have been great to have more funding right from the beginning. But we were trying to get that, and that's hard to do. I was just speaking with someone the other day about how hard it is to prove that you can actually do what you're saying you're going to do, because funders want to see proof. They want to see evidence that what you're doing is going to work. Well, you don't have any proof at the beginning, so it was very hard to get people to buy in to what we were doing at the beginning.
Yeah, that kind of takes me back a little bit down memory lane. And I was thinking, as before I came on staff, and I was a board member and I was a volunteer, and just the struggle and the prayers. And I remember staff going without pay many times. And I remember particularly one summer, I'm pretty sure it was a summer month, you said, I'm going to camp out. I need people to know. You were just at your wit's end. And how do I let people know that there's people on our streets that need help? And we needed the funding to make that happen. Yes. And you camped out for how many nights?
It was a week.
Yeah.
I stayed in the backyard there for a week. And people would come by and want to know the story and why I was doing that. And really part of it was a prayerful experience too, because I wanted to identify with women who didn't have a place to go. Right. And of course my camping experience was a lot different than what theirs would be. I don't pretend to say that it was anything like what it would have been to actually be homeless and not have the resources. But I did just want to do that sort of in solidarity with the women that I knew were camping. In fact, I knew one woman who was staying on the back porch of that home before we received it, sleeping there at night. So, I just thought surely if people know what the need is and that there's an organization here that's really ready to step in and meet that need, that they would want to be a part of it.
And I think you were right. Many people have learned about the services, and many, many generous people in this community are giving to the work at Safe Harbor now. And we thank you, Debbie, for doing the hard work of laying the foundation and going many, many weeks, months without pay to see where God would bring this organization now. Speaking of the women that you knew early on, now even, what do you think the biggest misconception of women experiencing homelessness, or anyone, men or women? What do you think is a stigma that people have in their minds about them?
I think the thing that I hear most of all is they just need to get a job.
Yeah.
People will say if they just would work, their problems would be solved. But once again, when you get behind the scenes and see, okay, they don't have transportation. I used to think, well, they could ride the bus, but there are so many limitations to where the bus goes and the hours that it runs. That's a big challenge for them to overcome. Education, job experience, so many things like that keep a person from getting a job. And again, if there is a high level of mental health crisis with the individuals that Safe Harbor serves and that are on the streets, that are homeless, that without the help that they need to help them with their mental health needs, they couldn't hold down a job.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's very challenging. It's not just a matter of go out and get a job.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, once an individual, any lengthy amount of time on the street per se, or experiencing homelessness, that begins the wear and tear of an individual physically, mentally, begins to take place. And there's evidence behind that, and so you really see the unraveling of a beautiful soul and it's hard to once an individual has experienced homelessness for a period of time, you'll find that there's community within those groups, and they find a sense of connectedness there. And we may not understand that. It's kind of like, why would you not want to get your own place? You modify this about your situation, but those relationships that they build, that camaraderie that they have within those communities, that was very eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
As a professional, stepping into that world, I'm an outsider, and you have to earn rapport and you have to earn trust, and that takes a while sometimes. And that's why I really appreciate your desire, Debbie, to have the long-term programming and have that open, low-barrier type of situation with the day shelter, because you were able to achieve just that. And once you listen to them and learn about them and earn their trust, that's when you really can start building momentum and make headway and bring individuals like volunteers in the picture, bring the faith community into the picture, because you've worked to earn that with individuals. And I think that's really key. I found that was very key in my professional and personal walk.
Yeah. And while we're talking about stigma, some people that are listening to us may wonder, why do they keep saying women experiencing homelessness? And I remember it was many, many years ago, I was at a City Gate, formerly Association of Gospel Rescue Missions conference, and I heard someone say, you don't want to label people and call them the homeless, or she's a homeless woman. Man, that really hit me like I am so... identity in Christ is so important to me. And when I realize that we're doing that as a community without even realizing that we're stigmatizing by labeling them. So I hope that as we talk about our friends experiencing homelessness, that our whole community will understand that's why it's a season. We want to offer hope. They are not destined to be homeless. God wants everything for them. He wants the best for them. And so I love being a part of a ministry that's important.
Yes.
So as we shift from experiencing homelessness back to substance use disorder, Sarah, can you paint the picture of our community now and why we've decided that we want to do everything we can to reduce the stigma?
Oh, well, I think the overdose rates are extraordinarily high. The access to substances, both legal and illegal, are at an all-time high. So much substance use is socially acceptable. You have all of these factors being disconnected. COVID. I know we've probably mentioned the effects of COVID, but that increased isolation and disconnection really, really, I think, have put our communities in a state of crisis. And we are seeing ongoing ripple effects from that, from women that are 65 and up experiencing homelessness suddenly.
Yeah.
The job loss, relationships, just the tension of just those toxic relationships. People are at home, unable to get out, and all of those things just come to an emotional head, and people don't know how to cope with all of that, And so I feel like, and then substances, Debbie. And this just to put things in perspective, our drug tests that we utilize at Safe Harbor, we had to purchase a 20-panel test.
Wow, didn't know that.
Because of all of the different substances. You had your standard 5-panel, early in the early days, but we have a 20-panel test because of all of the different substances that are being utilized today. people that are in the business of selling substances, they get very creative, and the substances that people are taking, the high that they experience, and the level of of becoming dependent quickly, has just escalated all the more. I mean, you can't keep up with all of the substances that are coming out and how it's targeting our youth. And so it's just very challenging. And I find that I'm grateful that the medical component to substance use is finally getting the recognition that it needs. That holistic, you hear a lot more about a holistic approach, about what that means for people. And so I think it brings, it's brought organizations together more, from the medical to the faith to human service providers to law enforcement. In the early days, there was like you needed to be a liaison between those things because people just weren't talking. Everybody was kind of siloed. You're supposed to be taking care of that substance use part. We're going to take care of this. Now I see the community coming together, sitting at the table, having discussions. Like not many people may know that we have a Catawba Alliance for Recovery that meets monthly, and it provides opportunity for law enforcement and different providers to come together and be like, okay, let's do something about this. And I'm very proud that Safe Harbor has been a forerunner in a lot of those conversations, and we're at the table. If there is a table to be at in reference to homelessness, mental health, and substance use, we're at the table.
Yes.
And so I have just been very pleased in my observations over the years, witnessing something move from a place of being very punitive to compassionate, and that's just been a blessing to see. And I feel like when you allow the faith community to have a say and be a part of that, I really feel like we really can bring that prayer, that compassion, unapologetically.
Yes.
I mean, that's our place here in this, and I think it's very valuable. And I've really seen from the court systems to, like I said, human service providers to medical staff really begin to embrace that. And so it's allowed us to be able to be more diverse in who we can serve in our programming. It used to be like, we don't know anything about that. We're not trained in that. We're going to have to get, But now it's like, you know what? We're partnered with this agency and this agency and this agency, and it's no longer this kind of situation. We have become equipped to take on some of these very complex situations because of the collaboration that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Debbie, I remember, some people may not know this listening to our podcast. Of course, you were the founder. You were the executive director when I started volunteering. And then about 2012, 11 or 12, you felt God calling you you wanted to be over programs only. That was where you felt your calling was. And I was on the board. We started seeking an executive director, and I'm very grateful that God called me to work alongside of you. And I was thinking, it's been about 5 years since you were on payroll at Safe Harbor, since you were on staff. When I was there were hours that you spent behind the door, one-on-one with the women. What advice might you have for that woman that's listening today, that's contemplating recovery? What advice do you have for her?
That's a good question, Vicki. I would say, first of all, don't lose hope, because, hopelessness is such a lie, and it's so easy to fall into that trap. So don't lose hope. But I would also say take the first step And the first step is often going to a meeting. Those are so easy to find now, AA, NA, there are meetings everywhere that you can get involved in. And then, of course, I'm prejudiced for Safe Harbor, but I do think that coming to the day program, the community center, is a good place to start because they can help you find recovery tools, recovery programs that are out there. And of course, you're always welcome to apply for the Whole Woman program at Safe Harbor. So I would say just take the first step. That is the most courageous step you'll ever take, is to ask for help and say, I can't do this alone. And in conversations with women over the years, when asked the question, what was missing from your recovery plan before, they usually say one of two things, or usually both. One is God was missing from my program, or I wouldn't let other people help me. I was trying to do this on my own.
Yeah.
And so recovery was never intended for a single person. It has to be part of done through community.
Yeah.
So we've heard that saying before, and Sarah, you may have to help me because it's been a while since I've said it, but recovery is not the absence of substance, it's the presence of community. Is that the essence of that? So yes, we need other people to help us with that.
We need other people in general, don't we? We need
certainly
each
do.
other. We were made for community. Mm-hmm. We've only got a little bit of time left, and I would be remiss with not going down memory lane just a little bit. It's so hard to contain all the miracles that we've seen God perform through Safe Harbor. And I'm just going to share a couple, and it might trigger some that you girls want to jump in. But I remember when I first came to Safe Harbor as on staff as the executive director, I received a call, and the call was from our wonderful partner Fleet Feet here in town. And they said, ask what we were doing. They had heard about Safe Harbor, and they said, we would like to donate running shoes to all the women in your program. And I was thrilled. I could not wait to tell them. And shortly after that, there were two women in the program that came into my office, and I told them, and their eyes got really big, and they were like, we were just praying in our house meeting for running shoes. Mm-hmm. The Y had just formed a collaboration to let them come to the Y, and they didn't have any running shoes or any tennis shoes. And that was the first, I wrote it down. It was like, okay, I'm ready for more, because I would hear Debbie tell all these miracles before I came on staff. Anything that you guys, as a highlight that you want to share in your tenure with Safe Harbor?
Well, I'll just say, I guess one of the biggest ones, and there were lots of small ones, and sometimes those small ones are just what you need to get through the day, just to remind you that, yes, it's God's still in control, He's still providing. But one of the biggest ones was in 2010, the end of 2010, somewhere around December. I was having lunch and was in the front office and answered the phone, and it was a gentleman saying, you don't know me and I don't know you, but we have some apartments that we'd like to donate to Safe Harbor. And I just remember just about dropping my lunch and saying, would you repeat what you just said? And, he laughed and said, yes, I did say donate, but you need to wait and see the apartments before you get too excited about it. And those, of course, have become so central to the programming at Safe Harbor. It was such a gift. And we had just talked about needing apartments at the fall event in November, and so this happened just shortly after that. So that's a big highlight in my mind.
And if you remember, right before that, we had there were 2 houses that were on the property where our new building is right now. And some donors said, "Why don't we raise the money to buy those and turn them into transitional housing," which is what our apartments ended up being. We were so excited. I remember sitting at a table at that time. I was a volunteer and praying over that. We thought we heard God right, and we bought those 2 houses. And then the city condemned them, and we had to raise another $10,000 to have them torn down. And we were sitting there with that property. And so when I took the role as executive director, I went to a gentleman that was really instrumental in buying that land and donating it later for our building. And I said, don't you think we should sell this property? We're having to keep the lawn mowed. We're having to pay taxes because we weren't using it for program. And he said, well, do you not ever want to build another building? And I'm thinking, have you seen our bank account? But that's exactly, we did hear God right. Mm-hmm. We were supposed to buy those. And so they sat right in the middle of the property we have now. And I believe that made those properties landlocked. And so it was easy to acquire the rest of the property that we needed mm-hmm. for that beautiful building that sits on that property now. Mm-hmm. And Sarah, before we close, was there anything that you wanted to share?
A particular situation with one of the ladies, I just remember it impacted me greatly because I am a justice seeker and I'm an advocate. And so when I feel like there's a sense of injustice going on, it really affects me. And so this particular participant came in and she had not had any contact with her children in 2 years. And, a part of the reason, like her ex-husband, he was very wise in the ways of, legalities of things and really had so many things tied up legally that were beyond her control. And just observing her go month after month without seeing her children, getting depositions in the mail. I mean, this was a nightmare. I mean, it was cruel and it just broke my heart. And we would appear in court and we would have no success. And, with a year-long program, it was just a struggle for her. But in our house meetings, you had mentioned that God shows up in our house meetings, and I'll never forget this. We were sitting in our house meetings, and typically we go through a curriculum. There's just randomly assigned reading, and so we just go through the room and we read scripture. There's no rhyme or reason to it. We just process it. And no kidding, I'm fairly certain that the verse was 2 Chronicles 20:17. We were all doing our reading, and this just happened to be what she read, and it says, "But you will not even need to fight. Take your positions, then stand still and watch the Lord's victory." Wow. And I'm telling you, there was silence in the room, and we were all astounded at just what happened because God showed that how intentional He is with those ladies. And I'd love to tell you that the next day that lady saw her children, and that wasn't the case. But a few years later, she kept on having faith in the Lord about what He said that He would do for her. And I'll never forget it. It was on Mother's Day. I got a random text from her. Of her in a picture with her children, and I just sobbed.
Yeah.
I was walking my neighborhood with my dog, and this is a true story. I turned the corner, and there was the clearest, most beautiful rainbow.
Aww.
It was so beautiful that I took off running to my house to get my phone, and I wanted to go back and get a picture, and by the time I went back, it was gone.
Aww.
But God, I believe that He had that rainbow just for me to see. I will fight the battles for these women. I will go before these ladies, and I will do things that will blow your mind. And He has. We don't have enough time to talk about the things that I have seen, the miracles happen in the courtroom, families that are restored, things that I have said, I don't think that's going to work out. And it does.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing.
This is so true. We could have named the podcast Shining the Light on Miracles and just really every episode talk about miracles for sure. I wish we did have time to talk about more. Debbie, I just want to end by thanking you from the bottom of my heart for being obedient to the call that God placed on your life. And many people may not know that you now are a certified spiritual director. You have your own business called Grace for Days, and we are blessed at Safe Harbor to contract with you to do spiritual direction with our staff. You also offer counseling through Grace Life. And I just want people to know that you are a resource that can show so much grace and help women and men through anything that they're facing, but especially in learning to hear from God and walking in the purposes that God has destined them. So Sarah and I are grateful to follow in your footsteps. You left some big ones, but with God, He has made it all possible. Last words from you about where Safe Harbor is now.
Very exciting. I think about the array of services that are available to women now through Safe Harbor. It's just amazing. I feel like you are reaching such a diverse group. The culture has changed, and Safe Harbor is changing to meet that diverse culture, but yet staying true to the foundations of Christ at the center and the core values that Safe Harbor has always embraced. So I feel very confident in the leadership of Safe Harbor. I feel very hopeful for the future of Safe Harbor, and it just makes me smile to see how things are going right now. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Yes. And thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Shining the Light.